Hello everyone. I recently got the chance to have pretty much the shop to myself at Warehouse Express in London and spend over an hour running around playing with all of the different cameras and trying them all out. So I got to have a go on the entire Canon range, the entire Sony range, and the entire Nikon range, and I had a little bit of play with some of the Fuji range as well. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I felt about that and the different camera bodies that I tried out, what surprised me, what disappointed me, and what made me think, wow, that's really good. So obviously I completely accept that this is just about ergonomics and handling, but I think this is a big part of it, and it made me think about a lot of other aspects such as lens selections and so on. So I'm going to touch on all of that as well. But I want to make a point first about the one bit that's going to be missing from this video, which is the image quality from these cameras. Having downloaded lots of raw files from these different cameras, I think there's just so little in the image quality anymore that it doesn't really matter that much. I think Canon's gone backwards on color science. I think Sony's gone forwards, and Nikon's always been really good. And I think they're at the point where they're different, but it's all pretty much even as to where they're at right now. Also, just the overall image quality, there's megapixel differences. If you even care about that, maybe it's relevant for use. In certain cases that might be, but each camera system has offerings that have the higher or lower megapixels if you want them. What did I do when I got there, and how was it, and what was the experience like? Because these things I think around ergonomics matter, and I've got a couple of really big points to make about this. This is totally subjective, and it's how it feels to you and what works for you that absolutely matters. Because what's right for me might not be right for you. Let me just briefly touch on the perspective that I'm coming at this from. I need a camera that's kind of an all-rounder that can do a decent job of video and can do all my photography work for my pro stuff, because I'm missing out on stuff where I can be doing video, and I'd like to have a camera that can kind of do everything. But I also make these YouTube videos, and the camera that I'm experimenting with at the moment and that I'm filming this on right now is the Sony a7R5. Now, when I went into this shop, the first camera that I tried out was the Canon R3, which I think, to me, looks like the best ergonomic experience out there. It looks fantastic, just looking at it. But I was a little bit surprised with the entire Canon range for me. Now, this is the thing. It's always about you. When you handle a camera, how it fits you. I was surprised, for me, that Canon's kind of moved away from their DSLR layout. It just feels quite different now, and it was very hard for me to feel like the Canons were Canons. Like, if you're used to a 5D range or a 6D range or something like that, I just don't feel that Canon has that same feel anymore. The dial, the thumb dial on the back, whilst it feels like it's good quality, and some of the control layouts, to me, just there's nothing wrong with it. It just doesn't really feel like Canon anymore. It's like Canon's changed and become something different. And whether you like that or not is going to be up to you. But I was surprised, especially on the R5, how I thought the R5 was going to be a lot bigger than it was. I don't know why I felt like that, but I thought the R5 was going to be substantially bigger than the Sony a7R5. And I think that they didn't feel that much different, really, to me. They didn't feel like there was a big sort of difference between them. But the Canon range I thought was very well thought out. I thought the ergonomics were good overall. It was kind of fun to use the Canons, and I did really like the R3. I have to say, I thought that the R3, whilst it didn't live up to what I was expecting in terms of the ergonomics from just the way it looks more comfortable than it actually is. I thought the grip wasn't as good as some of their earlier 1D bodies, but at the same time, it was lighter and excellent, and the viewfinder was really good, and the screen on the back was good. Although I noticed the screen on the back still seems to have that thing that Canon do, where it won't go all the way out. It won't face you. Like on that A7R5 right now, I'm using the little flip out screen, and it actually faces me, whereas on the Canon, it always seems to be tilted away. It doesn't seem to go out, be able to face you properly. It's not a big deal. I just think it's weird that they can't sort of see that when they're making some of these cameras. But I thought that the Canon's control layout was really logical and really nice. But overall for me, I'm not saying I wouldn't buy a Canon camera. Canon is, for me now, not what it used to be. It feels like someone came along and took it over and it changed ownership. And now it's been running by other people. So they've kind of inherited what Canon was, but there's new people with new ideas. Very, very much feels like that to me. And I'm still on the fence a little bit about how much I like that. I have to state again, it's just my feelings. It's completely subjective, doesn't mean anything. Fantastic cameras. I think all these cameras realistically in terms of performance are basically as good as each other. So it's about what you like. in the end. But I feel like Canon is doing something a little bit different. And I think they're still figuring certain things out. Like even they don't even know where to put the on-off switch. They still haven't figured that out. So I think they've got a little bit of a way to go. They're making incredibly good professional products. It depends on, for me, Canon depends on what they release in the future. But I didn't feel that I saw anything in the Canon range that I handled there where I felt like that I really loved what they'd done in terms of design and layout. It's kind of weird for me to say it, but I feel like the A7R5 is a more evolved layout. I'm not going to say that it's the most ergonomic experience. It isn't, but I think that they figured out the mirrorless layout, to my mind, better than Canon now, which is just bizarre. But I feel like they've been on this project for longer. So I would say that the Canon range is definitely better than the old Sony shapes. But the newer ones like the A7R5 and A7 IV, I think Sony's kind of moved ahead a bit because they figured out these layouts and they've nicked a lot of stuff from Nikon and old Canon designs. To me, they just look like they've taken the best parts of Nikon's design and the best parts of Canon's design, and they've just brought them together and we'll go with that, and then just move things around a bit until it's right. And now that's what they've got. So I think Sony's done a really good job of that. Speaking on Sony slightly, Sony has so many advantages with their lens setup and their lens selection, because I can get 35 1.4s and 85 1.4s at a reasonably cheap price, and there just isn't a comparable lens choice from the other manufacturers for that. Nobody else can quite do that yet, which is really disappointing. And it makes me think, like, even when they bring out these 1.2 lenses, like a 35 1.2, I don't really want a 35 1.2. What I want is a 35 1.4 more than I want a 1.8, because it's different. When you're used to it and you see it, it really is different. So a 35 1.4 for me would be an ideal environmental portrait lens. It would be absolutely perfect. Much smaller than a 35 1.2, and probably about a third of the price as well, because that 35 1.2 that Nikon's going to bring out and Canon's going to bring out is probably going to be like $3,000, and you can get the Sony 35 1.4 for a hell of a lot less than that. You can see my point. It's just going to be some very expensive, very heavy, very large glass, which is going to be fantastic. Maybe Sigma and Tamron will come in and fill in that gap for Nikon and perhaps for Canon at some point. But the Sony system overall, the handling of it, especially I'm talking about the A7R5, it's doing everything really well. But I don't like the grip on it. And I'm also, just little things that bug me is that if I don't like picking up the camera, the control, this is a hard thing because the control out on the Sony is excellent. It just needs to be all of it a bit bigger. It's just that the whole experience is kind of cramped. And when you stick the L bracket on the bottom of it, like an Arca Swiss plate that you can extend the grip with, which I've got, it just unbalances the thing. It fixes one problem and creates another. So this is an issue, but the Sony system as a whole and the Sony camera as a whole essentially ticks all the boxes. I just wish that in the 4K side of things that it had 60p and 120p uncrops. When I look at Nikon fixes all of that video side, and the Nikon camera like the Z8, for example, which I got to try because they didn't actually have one in stock. There was a guy there called Peter Lee, really nice guy, just a customer turned up, and he let me use his, which he had in his bag with him, so I got to compare the Z9 and the Z8. And thank you very much for that, Peter. If you do ever watch this, thank you. I sent you a message as well, you know that, but I'm really pleased to be able to try that out, and it was very kind of him to let me use his camera and directly compare it to the other ones. The Z8 and the Z9, which I wanted to touch on. First time I've ever used a mirrorless camera where I've just felt like this is a DSLR but mirrorless. No one's done that yet, apart from these two cameras. So Nikon's approach is like, literally, we've made mirrorless cameras which are just DSLRs without mirrors in them, with all of the benefits and downsides that come with that. So they are bigger, heavier, easily the best build quality in the industry. I mean, that's game over as far as I'm concerned. There's no way that anyone is touching the build quality on those two cameras. They're heavy, and they're heavy for a reason, because they are armor plated, it feels like. They're just rock solid. And I know that the Z8 has this carbon plastic whatever compound thing on it, but if you feel the camera, whilst you can kind of tell that it has that plastic part of the body on it, it feels a bit more plastic, certainly compared to the Z9. It still feels more solid than the Sonys and the Canon cameras to me, especially all of the things on the outside of it, all of the controls and so on. It feels super high quality, and you pay a price for that in weight. The build quality on all of these mirrorless cameras for what I want to do is good enough. But the thing that I liked with the Nikons, the Z8 and the Z9, was the simplicity of them. It was a very nice layout. If you're used to DSLRs, I think the Z8 and the Z9 were really good, and the grips were perfect on them. The Z8 grip just felt so comfortable to use, even though it's quite a heavy camera. It felt really, really comfortable. And that was the experience that I've been looking for on a mirrorless camera. But when I noticed certain things as well, which were slight downsides, was that for instance, the viewfinder on the Z8 and the Z9 were quite far behind the A7R5. In the viewfinders on the Z9 and Z8, you can still see all of the little grid lines of the pixels. Although the refresh rate was really high, you could definitely notice the drop in resolution compared to the A7R5, and their viewfinders were noticeably smaller than the A7R5 as well. But I think that on the other hand, that's not an issue for me. It's enough resolution to do the job. I think they should have gone the Canon route, because to me, Canon has the best viewfinders. I think that theirs were better. Like looking through the R5 and the R3, what you had was a middle ground on the resolution, and you could tell it wasn't quite as much as the Sony, but it was smooth. There was never any lag. Like sometimes on the Sony, it can just start to lag and stutter a bit, whereas the Nikon didn't stutter, and the Canon, I didn't see it stuttering at all or having any issues. The resolution on the Canons was higher in the viewfinders, which I think was the best middle ground, because it's probably going to draw a bit more power, but they were just the better viewfinders. But when it came to the screens on the back, then the game's changed again. I thought the Nikon screens on the back were the best. They were just almost luxurious, I would say, as an experience, which sounds a little bit weird, but they just looked so high end and competent and professional. And it's not about the dots, they all have 2.1 million dots, whatever it is they've got. It's like with TVs, there's 4K TVs and there's 4K TVs. Some of them look almost like they're more like the 1080p, and some of them really look super rich and clear and wonderful, and the Nikon fitted into that. I thought the Canon ones were good as well. And Sony just lagging slightly, just a little bit behind. But that doesn't really bother me. I would say for me, the A7R5, the screen on the back, is more than good enough. But would I like to have the Z8 experience as a screen on the back? Yeah, absolutely, because I do I'm 90% using the screen on the back of the camera. But this is a thing, though. We have to talk about this when it comes to the screen on the back of the camera. If you want to put the camera on the gimbal, it's better if you have a flip out screen. So this is where the video work side of things comes in. If you want to film yourself like I do here for YouTube, I'm using the screen on the side. I would have to attach an external monitor, which I do have, and I don't mind doing that. But if I'm going outside and doing YouTube videos when I'm speaking to you guys, I will have to have a separate camera. If I went for the Z8, I would have to have a different camera with a flip screen that I can see myself, a dedicated vlogging camera. But that's not a downside, because the way that I would use these cameras for landscapes and street photography, which is to have a separate vlogging camera, it's better that it's a separate camera, because it's going to have a mic on top of it, and I want it to be just set, ready to go. I don't want to have to change anything. I want to be able to just switch it on, hit record. So that's probably going to happen anyway. So it might be that I end up with a ZV-E1 or an A7S III or something as a vlogging camera, and go to the Nikon side for the photos. I don't know yet. What I can say as an overall experience, though, was that the Nikons were the first time I've used a mirrorless camera where I was like, yes, this is it. This is the answer. It was the first cameras where I just think I want to pick them up and shoot with them. I just haven't had that experience with mirrorless. The only thing that I have had that with is the Fuji X Pro 1. That I did as well, because I love that, but it's not going to answer my problems for what I want to do with photography, because I need video. And the Nikon side fixes the video side. The uncropped 4K 60p and 120p is there. I don't even mind if it's a small crop, but it works and it's there. And it's in the camera that would do the stills as well. So for me, combining something like that, Z8 or a Z9, with a vlogging camera separately is probably the way forward for me. But the downside with Nikon right now for me is that they just don't have the lens selection that I want. The 85 is a 1.2. I don't need a 1.2. It's very expensive. I want a 1.4. It's the same thing on the 35. They've got the 1.8s, but what I want is a 1.4. But I'm hopeful that Sigma and Tamron will come in and fill those gaps. But what I would like is to have the focus performance that comes from the newer mirrorless lenses. And I would like to be investing into the mirrorless system rather than having to buy older used lenses and adapt them. Even if it's flawless, my preference would always be that I'm using lenses that are designed for that mount, and I don't think Nikon's going to produce what I want, which is what Sony's done, where they've gone for the 1.4s first of all and then looking at 1.2s later. So this is my dilemma right now. Effectively, Sony does everything that I need it to do. If I added an FX3 into the Sony system, I can do everything. It has all of the lenses and all of the functionality that I need. Plus everything would be in one system. And with Nikon, I would have to have two systems. I have to have a Sony and a Nikon. I don't really enjoy using the Sony. It doesn't make me pick it up and want to use it. It does the job really well, but they're just not that likable. They're just all right. Whereas Nikon is really, really likable. So I think at the moment, my mind is either Z9 or Z8 as a photo video work camera, and probably have to go with a Sony as a vlog YouTube camera. Oh, anyway, enough of this. Take care. See you again next video. Bye-bye.